Welcome to Slow Down to Speed Up. I'm Brian Wang, an executive coach who helps founders grow by working through their biggest challenges. On this show, we have real one-time coaching sessions where you will hear things my clients never say elsewhere because they're working through current live issues. I ask everyone who comes on the show to dig deep and trust that by the end, they will learn something about themselves and how to move forward in their business. On today's session, I work with Erik Dunteman, CEO and co-founder of a company called Banana. His question is, how do I bring more intensity and accountability to my team without being an asshole? What's really interesting about this session is that rather than just talk about the problem, I push Erik to go directly into the experience that he's trying to avoid. What results is a set of visceral reactions that actually contain lots of useful information for Erik. And as I help him process through those reactions, he arrives at a breakthrough. And on the other side of that breakthrough, he starts to see new possibilities in the way he shows up to his team. So if you're someone who struggles with pushing others productively, this episode is for you. Let's listen in.
It's been a stressful period for Banana. For me, the biggest one that's top of mind is figuring out how to be more of a leader and less of an individual contributor. I see. I find my comfort zone is definitely just tucking away and doing code. And, at times the team needs that, but at times the team needs that extra direction, extra belief that they're going in the right direction. And I think that ultimately comes down to me. And I failed at this in the past. So I think now is the time to figure this out. It seems pretty existential.
Yeah, so even just listening to you describe it at first, it sounds like there are a few examples that are springing up to mind for you as you're bringing it up. And, you're talking about the shift of becoming a leader. I guess before we even get into any specific examples, I'm wondering if you can expand on the distinction a little bit for me. Like in your mind, what does it mean to show up as a leader versus just kind of showing up as an IC for your team?
Yeah. I think it'd be easy to conflate with the whole more like product manager person who manages tasks on a board. And that's less of the energy I'm trying to bring in. I think it's more eliminating any sort of ambiguity around why we're doing what we're doing. Because I think engineering output is what matters the most right now for the team. An engineer who's not 100% confident that what they're doing is impactful is stuck not at 90% or 80%, but they're at probably 20% capacity. The magic that happens is when you get to such high clarity that you're just chugging along and you hit a flow state. But if you're constantly second guessing whether or not you're working on the right thing in the first place, it's sort of hard to get into that. So that's really how I would define leadership in this sense of making people feeling or giving people the feeling of being part of a unit, having a very clear direction, having a very clear, call it sprint for the week, but also understanding why that's important and how that helps us in the greater picture of things.
Yeah, so it sounds like the big theme or one of the big themes is creating clarity. Like, why are we doing what we're doing across multiple Zoom levels? Not just here's what we're doing today in today's stand-up or the sprint for the week, but also how does it tie into the broader picture of why we're doing all of this at all? And once you have all of that in place, when people can come up or come to work knowing, I know why I'm doing what I'm doing and how it fits in, then that's where things start to fall into place for you, it sounds like.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, like, as you're speaking about that, I'm curious, like, how do you see yourself fitting into creating that sort of set of conditions that you're describing?
I'm a tad biased because I recently listened to a biography of Julius Caesar. So I'm thinking about a particular battle where the troops themselves were faltering, like they weren't doing well. And Julius went to the front lines and basically presented himself and like basically saying, hey, this is the final push. This is the moment that matters right now. Therefore, give it your all. I wouldn't say that directly translates to exactly what we're doing right now because it is a longer term battle in our sense. But I really want to make sure I'm answering your question here. I got my mind on Julius Caesar.
Yeah. Something about him is resonating, it sounds like.
Yeah. Well, it's ultimately like how do I show up and continue to put in the work, like still be, in the arena, be a leader who's with the people,
Yeah.
But do so in a way that is strategic, that communicates to the team to drop any sort of ambiguity they may have, or like worries or lack of clarity, and know like now's the moment to do X and get that done, get it done together.
So there's something about kind of being on the ground with them that's really important to you.
Yeah.
And is that kind of the IC impulse that you referenced earlier?
Yeah. I definitely have a lot of guilt being full manager. I think the team's too small to warrant that. And also I don't want to put myself on a pedestal. And it feels like doing so would be putting myself on a pedestal.
Can you say more about that?
Yeah, it's like, I don't know. I don't feel like I deserve it to be like by rank higher. And of course, like managers, you got to view it like your team members. And you can't be viewed as a hierarchy. Though ironically, the team seems to crave some sort of leadership and, person to report to. So I found my natural guilt about stepping up and being not just a leader by example, but a leader by rank and by power, in a sense.
Right.
That feels super weird to me and super wrong to me. And given our team size, we're a full-time team of 6 right now. It just doesn't feel appropriate for me to go fully hands off. But I've also seen signals on the other end.
Yeah, let's stay with that for a second. So I want to verify something with you, Erik. So let's just say for a moment that you dropped any sort of guilt or sense of guilt around being a manager, being a leader, maybe directing your team on what to do and why and so on, or telling them, hey, let's drop this, X, Y, Z. Just hypothetically, if you dropped all of that for a moment, how would this whole thing change for you, or how would it feel?
Yeah. I feel like I'd have plenty of one-on-ones. And not from a, let's have an organized meeting, a standing meeting every week. But I'd want to basically put the completion of said project in the hands of a team member. Say, hey, this is fully yours. My job is to be here, help it along, make sure you're coordinating with the team, offer my services as well. If you need me as IC, you tell me to do so because you're the owner of this project. But being extremely explicit about this, and I think the leadership, in my sense, wouldn't be around how does the project get done. It'd be around setting the expectation that it gets done, and it gets done extremely well.
What I just heard you say is if you drop the guilt, then you would effectively be turning your teammates into owners, and you would offer yourself to them.
Yeah.
They're the ones who are in charge of bringing these projects to completion. Did I hear that right?
You heard that right, and the interesting issue
something's coming up for you.
Yeah. Something's definitely coming up. So I want to turn people into owners. I am too polite to hold people to their outcomes. So if somebody's an owner and they screw it up, I have yet to develop the skill to basically I would never yell at someone. But if the team is depending on an owner to get something done and it doesn't get done, that's an issue. That's somebody who's not helping the team's mission.
Okay, so let's pause for a second. So the way you're describing that sounds like if I make people owners, or if I hand ownership over to my team, I run the risk of them missing the mark. And then there comes this moment where I might have to bring that up, or I might have to hold that person accountable.
Yeah, that's a good word.
And then is that where this guilt is coming from? This sense like now I have to hold your feet to the fire, so to speak?
Yeah. Yeah. I feel imposing to put that level of pressure on someone. And it's a lot easier for me emotionally to take that pressure myself than to put it on others.
Yeah.
Because if I put it on others, that requires me to have a bunch of uncomfortable conversations.
Yeah. I think no matter what, you're going to end up in these uncomfortable or situations. It's just that in the kind of the status quo, you're sort of chosen to be uncomfortable in a different way, right? Like, you know, I'm going to maybe take on a bunch of this stuff myself and notice that there's a mess, but I'm not going to say anything about it. You also said, you know, my team seems to be looking for guidance and leadership from me. But, you know, that aside, I want to kind of zoom in on this thing that I heard you say. It's like, well, if they're owners and they miss the mark, and then now we have to get uncomfortable. You use this word like imposition, like I'm imposing on these people now. And I think that seems to tie in with what you were referring to earlier around power and rank and so on.
Yeah.
And so what I'm curious about is, what would it look like to work with your team in a way where you're all agreeing that you want results, right? And you all agree that mistakes will be made, deadlines will be missed, right?
Yeah.
But this isn't about you imposing. This is about everyone wanting to get quality results. Like, what does a conversation between you and your team look like under that condition?
We've had similar conversations of sort of, why aren't we doing this? Like, why
Doing what
isn't
exactly?
it framed? Why aren't we assuming that everyone on the team also wants results? This came up at our offsite of where maybe we don't trust that the other person is also aligned on what the mission is and is willing to put in hard work and get into uncomfortable situations in order to make that happen. But we've talked about, like, if you just assume that the other person is there, I'll say to win, not in like a zero-sum game sort of way, but they're there to win. They're there to excel at what they do and succeed at the mission that we have.
Sure.
If you assume that everything you communicate, every tough conversation, is in service of that outcome, not contrary to them as a person. And this has been brought up of, hey, why don't you trust us more to receive that?
That's them to you?
Yeah. They've felt frustrated that ultimately, like, if the mission's not succeeding, and you mentioned this before, like, hard conversations are going to come up anyway. And if I'm shouldering the responsibility and not imposing it on the rest of the team, they're still frustrated that we're not succeeding in the way that they want. And what I view as a service to them of, you know, not imposing, ends up being a disappointment, because they're like, I'm here for the mission. I'm not here to feel good. I'm here because I want to do good work.
Right.
So
you have already had some of this conversation explicitly.
Yeah. And I don't know why it remains a sticking point for me.
Yeah. I just noticed you took a big sigh a second ago. What was that about?
Whenever I notice I talk about something twice, for me, that's a really bad sign. Because it means that I didn't act on it in the way that I should have the first time.
Okay.
And the fact that people on the team went out of their way to communicate this to me and I'm here more than a month later talking about it, it feels like I've had a sense of failure. Okay. I didn't honor the request that the team had for me.
Right. Okay. So you're feeling some sense of failure just like in the moment, real time here as we're touching on this.
Yeah. Realizing that this isn't the first time I've talked about this. And if it comes up more often than I'm actually acting on it, I'm more of a talker than a doer, which is not the version of me I want to be.
Yeah. Okay. So we're pausing on this very moment, you like noticing yourself doing the talking and not the doing. Right. And so like what's occurring to you to do from that? Like it sort of seems like you're having some feelings about this because it's important to you.
Yeah. It's important to me. I think it's something that requires practice to do well. I don't expect myself to get immediately good at it, but I at least expect myself to show significant progress in trying. And then the next natural question is, what's the blocker in me trying, practicing? What's stopping me from practicing? Is there anything I could do there? And part of it is making sure I communicate to the team that I want to grow in this, and having a very clear dialogue with each one of them of how it's going. Encouraging them to support me in it. Now I'm wondering if that's even necessary. Like if that's just me feeling bad about doing the thing versus just doing it.
What is?
But
let's make it more explicit. What does doing it look like? Like even just a small, tangible.
I think. That's a great question. I don't know what it looks like, so I'd just be throwing things at a wall. Maybe one week come in and just be way too aggressive, and wait for people to give feedback of, hey, that was too much.
Right.
I've never worked with an amazing manager. I started being a founder directly after graduating undergrad. I had some internships, but it was in very slow-moving companies that had strict hierarchies, and that's the version of a manager I don't want to be. But in a startup environment, I don't know what success looks like on this. So
maybe you're starting from a little bit of a disadvantage there.
Yeah, maybe that's why I'm talking about it more, is I'm trying to form my own definition of what a great leader looks like, because I've never seen it.
Right.
And if I were to try it, it would just be like, hey, does this work? And then hope people give feedback, but it's also uncomfortable to give feedback, so you can't 100% trust that. So my safe space is to continue talking about this versus trying something.
Right. Yeah. So let's see if we can maybe walk toward the edge a little bit here, like the edge of the discomfort. Because like you said, just talk all day about it. That feels really safe. But there's not a lot of doing there. So you actually just described a great example of this where, you're going after it and you get aggressive, and then your team's like, whoa, that was too much. What do you picture you doing, or the way you're showing up, the energy? Like, what does that look like in your mind, this idea of you showing up aggressively?
I think the ultimate example that people go to on this sense is the Steve Jobs archetype. Come in, have very strong opinions. I don't know enough about Steve Jobs to perfectly quote how he works, but this is the reputation that he had. It was very tough to work with him because he would be so rigid on his idea of how to do things that it made it so everyone else was basically running around, chicken with their heads cut off, trying to match his vision.
So do me a favor, Erik. Imagine you're doing that. So just step into that movie for a moment. and I'm going to give you permission to get it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So like, okay, yeah, in retrospect, you're going to be like, yeah, that was really aggressive, but just see if you can imagine that, embody that sort of very fiery opinion, rigid opinion sort of thing. And then imagine how people are reacting to you and just tell me what you see.
Well, one nice thing is the team definitely aren't pushovers. So I think if I were to get too fired up about something, there would be, civilized pushback on that. So in the scenario where I come in with that sort of attitude, there'd be civilized pushback. I think there would be trust as well. If I were to come in with an idea that was completely off of what everyone else thinks, I do believe people would, give their opinions, but also trust me in that sense, and maybe even go along with it, even if it's not clear to them. And there actually may be a sense of relief as well.
Say more about that.
The team craves intensity, and I'm currently not bringing intensity. So regardless of the form of that intensity, like just getting something sounds nice for them. And of course, like this whole conversation, I don't want to speak for them, but I know every time somebody has come in with a level of intensity, even if you have to back them up a bit, and like sort of de-escalate hard opinions, it's almost preferable to at least like have an opinion than to have no opinion, if that makes sense. It's better to be aggressive and then walk it back than it is to be too passive and not get to the level of intensity that the team wants.
So, okay, let me pause and I want to share what I'm noticing in what you're saying then, Erik. It sounds like on some level, you're really, like, you have no trouble articulating what your team is asking for and what it wants. And if there was like a spectrum that we were to imagine where it's like zero intensity and it's like, let's all be very, peace loving and hold hands and no conflict. And there's just like, on the other end, it's like very high conflict. We're butting heads and we're getting really aggressive with each other. Like you find yourself closer to the former, but your team is kind of asking for something closer to the latter. Maybe not to the point where the conflict is toxic, but there's something useful about friction. And so I want to just kind of tune back into your experience of this. So there's this mismatch between what you can cognitively recognize what your team is asking for and then how you're showing up. So even as you were stepping into this example of kind of being the Steve Jobs character, you sort of like, yeah, the team, they have healthy pushback. They kind of want the intensity. So I'm curious, like, what does that feel like for you? Just imagining that scenario. What do you notice in your experience of it?
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah. So like, what I'm noticing is that you have no trouble describing like the behavior that you could maybe try out and how that maybe even your team is wanting something like that. Right. But my sense is like, even just in you and I having this conversation, like, I don't get the sense that you're like, yeah, cool. I'm going to walk away and be like, great, I'm going to show up with more fire. I'm going to show up with more opinions here. Right. So I'm just curious, like, what the gap is there, right? Like you clearly understand it, right? But what's you were referencing the blocker, right? What are you noticing that's blocking you?
This ties into my frustration of having talked about this so much, is I feel like I understand the problem. I don't know how to implement the solution. Or maybe I do know how to implement the solution. There's two blockers right now.
Yeah.
One is I need to find the energy and the passion within myself in the first place to come in with that fire. It's not like I have a bunch of pent up like intensity that I'm just filtering and holding back. I recognize I too want to bring more intensity into my work, and there's been, just the personal emotional journey of being a founder. I'm not at peak when it comes to the intensity I'm bringing. I've seen myself in the past bring significant intensity in a good way, like very, very good way that made me proud. And I'm currently not there. So blocker
Yeah.
number one, it feels like I would be faking it or disingenuous to bring that intensity in to the
Yeah.
team.
Got it.
Blocker two, there's still not the trust that if I bring intensity in and I exceed the line of what people want, that they're able to walk it back. Because ultimately it's a spectrum of like low intensity, high intensity. Somewhere in the middle is what people want in order to feel like they're doing good work without being demoralized. And what we're saying here is like walk up the intensity until you cross the threshold and then trust that people are able to basically step you back and, land on that happy spot. So there's still the trust of will people hate me? Will people actually be willing to speak up? I believe that they would be, but I haven't seen it in practice because I haven't practiced it. So
Well, it's a little bit of a catch-22 there.
yeah, it definitely is. It's one of those things where like given a catch-22, even if it seems logically like action isn't helpful, it's better than just doing nothing. So
Right. Well, you listed like two of these things, right? So there's like, hey, I'm noticing I don't even have this like authentic intensity to bring right now. And then there's the second thing around, I don't know if I can trust my team to pull me back when I've gone too far. Which of those feels more of the blocker right now? If you had to choose.
So the big problem is, well, the second one, the team isn't walking me back and or I don't trust that the team will give me the feedback if I've overstepped. Ultimately, that's the thing I want to solve, but I feel like the core issue is actually that first one of, or call it the parent issue. The next level up is the intensity I bring, because I believe that a more intense version of myself would be someone who's more willing to figure out the second one.
Yeah, I got it. I got it. Yeah,
it seems like derivative.
Right. Well, I mean, it's kind of like you're not even going to have the problem of, is my team going to calibrate for me or give me feedback if you don't have that sort of authentic well of energy to draw upon in the first place, right?
Yeah.
So let's maybe go there for a second.
Mm-hmm. It feels like a bit of a side tangent, but it does feel like the overreaching issue here.
Yeah. So tell me more about it. Like you're noticing that you can't even find the intensity right now, the energy, although you've been in touch with that before.
Yeah.
Can you just say more about it overall?
Yeah. So my motivations when I started in startup, not just Banana, but 5 years ago when I went full time on the startup, or in startups in general, my motivation was primarily fun and status. I did startups because it was fun, and at the time, I feel like I was pretty naive. So my opinion of what a cool 21-year-old at the time, this is or 22. This is just the coolest thing I could do. I could be 4 of 30 under 30. Like, this is sick. I'll do pitch competitions, be on Shark Tank. Like, that was my definition of startup. And that's one of the reasons I got into it, because it felt like a cool status game.
Yeah.
So it was a lot easier for me if I'm having fun and if positive performance led to me feeling high status, high ego. It was a reason for me to come in with a fire and a reason for me to advocate for myself, or like create the positive outcomes for myself, because it was directly tied to some outcome.
So you would feel driven to pursue those things.
Yeah. If I bring intensity, I both have fun and I have people around me that instant who will be like, oh, wow, you're so intense. Like, I was posting on Snapchat and Instagram all the time, like sort of lifestyle hustler
Yeah, so there's this kind
influencer
of like
type
sense of
thing.
validation and significance
Yeah.
thing going on there.
Yeah, so I got the instant hit from that, so it was able to
Yeah.
continue.
Yeah.
Fast forward to today, I've gotten mostly off of social media because I think a lot of my motivation is no longer extrinsic. So it's a lot harder to get that instant hit. Additional thing is we've raised, at this point, significant money from investors. So the drive to win isn't about what could I do for myself. It starts becoming I have this debt that I need to pay to the people who took a shot on me. And it feels more like it's like, to use an analogy, imagine you're saving up money.
Yeah.
If you have zero debt and you're saving up 100K, that feels great because you're like, wow, look at me. If you're at 100K debt and you're just trying to pay that off, effectively you're doing the same things, but it feels way, way worse.
Right. Yeah.
So I
Is
think
that what it feels like running and leading Banana right now? It's like I'm digging myself out of that.
Yeah, I'm not having fun. I'm fulfilling the responsibility that I've put myself into. And not just purely investors, but also just like I have publicly said, I'm Erik Dunteman, I'm building Banana, and we're going to be the future of AI computing. Now I got to live up to that. Like it's
yeah. So at some point it sounds like it flipped from, hey, this is fun, this is exciting, to, oh man, like I have to do all this stuff. I've made these promises. I have to fulfill my obligations. You didn't use that word, but it's kind of, I want to see if that fits. It's like,
I mean, this is very, very thematic to what I'm going through right now, which is over the last month, I've been leaving probably one of the worst depressions I've had in 8 years. And the big trigger words that I realized were getting me into this state were, you're saying obligations. For me, it was like, I ought to do something versus I want to do something. That it's such a crippling feeling of I ought to do something, because it has you doing things that you aren't bringing your full intensity self into.
Right.
So recently been working more on doing things that I want to do. And trusting that, yes, I ought to do this laundry list of things. But if I'm not at peak, I'm not going to do well on those things anyway. Versus if I focus on myself, focus on having fun, I bring a better version of myself into the things that I ought to do, and perhaps they feel like want to do is once I actually get to that point. So this is, we've touched in like the other major thread of like emotional things I've been going through is, I've put, or mentally I've positioned myself as I have a bunch of ought tos. I ought to be a perfect founder. I ought to create massive returns for our investors. I ought to do all that.
I ought to shield my team from accountability.
Exactly.
Right.
Like I put myself into the position. Why should I expect somebody else who's signed up, like who's putting themselves out on a limb to join me? Why should I put that pressure on them? This is.
You know what's interesting? It's hopefully this is not too much of a tangent, but in listening to that, it almost sounds like on some level you have taken it upon yourself to take responsibility, like too much responsibility for yourself and for others. Like, you know, you have a bunch of people who have voluntarily joined your company, said, I'm going to go spend my time and my energy on this team, and I'm signing up for something that's going to require something of me. And yet I hear in just the way you're describing, it's like, whoa. Like, I got to make sure that I'm taking on as much of the burden as I can for these folks. I got to shield them. They can't handle that on some level, right? It's up to me to make sure that you know, everything goes smoothly for them. And there's this like sense of like, I need to kind of control it all as much as I can. It's important for you to do that.
Yeah, this is going back to my visions of what a toxic or negative manager is. Um, but for me, somebody, and again, I haven't worked in an organization where I've been an employee, seen a great manager, and
Sure.
worked extremely hard as an employee. Uh, I think there's the overwhelming sentiment that employees, um, like, you shouldn't take advantage of them. And our employees, they're working hard. Like they put in hours. I think they're sacrificing things within their own lives. So I already feel like a established sense of guilt around that. Um, so to demand more feels, I don't know. It feels like such a tall ask. Of
What's
course, like
making you think
it's
that
a
you
taller ask for us to fail, and like,
right?
um, we no longer can pay payroll and we have to shut things down like that. That's a much worse ask. So of course we like need to make it work. But
What's making you think that you couldn't say, hey guys, I think we need to push harder on this? And what's making you not trust that they might push back or say no or offer something alternative?
That's funny. How frequently this topic comes up and on how I still haven't learned to trust that perhaps my definition or like my image of what's going to go through people's head, like I haven't changed that. Um,
I want to just point something out. I've heard you use the word trust a few times.
yeah,
What does that mean to you?
good question. I don't want to get too meta analytical here. But the fact that I don't have a clear definition of the word trust implies to me that I've just been using the word out of habit or out of, you know, being able to represent this idea versus actually critically thinking, is trust the right word? What even am I trying to define here? In the end, I don't want people to view me. Can I swear? Is it okay if I?
Go for
Yeah,
it.
I don't want people to view me as an asshole. Um,
Stay with that.
Yeah, I want to be respected. I think a lot of the reason I do what I do, or my main motivation, um, is to achieve things that most don't. In fact, very, very, very few, if not zero, achieve. So part of that requires pushing limits. And there's still something uncomfortable about actually putting that into practice.
Let me go back to the asshole thing. What happens if someone thinks you're an asshole? Like, what do you have to feel in that situation?
It's great. Because when you actually think about it, it's like, oh, well, you talk about it, and if they decide they don't want to be around you, it's like it's their choice, and they could choose to leave. Or
You're still talking about it. So let's say I'm like, Eric, you were a real asshole just now. What does that feel?
I mean,
just get out of your head. What does that feel like below the neck? What does that feel like for you?
Ooh, yeah, it's in my chest, is where it is.
Okay. Stay with that.
Yeah.
Tell me about that feeling.
Connecting it to the sense of disappointing my parents is like what, like, where the feeling comes from of I'm a human trying to do my best in the world.
Yeah.
And if I know that I've screwed up, which if somebody calls me an asshole, for me, my definition of that is I've screwed up.
Okay.
Because I am a people pleaser. I want people to like me.
Sure.
If somebody says I'm an asshole, that's them telling me that I failed at the thing I derive a lot of joy from, which is people liking me and appreciating me. If somebody said, "Hey, Eric, you were really an asshole there," I would I definitely, I'd have the political response of, oh, like, thank you for this feedback. I really appreciate that. It was very brave of you to be able to tell me that. I'm
Right.
glad that we have this open space where you feel safe communicating that to me.
But underneath that, you're like your voice is like going real monotone. It's like
Yeah,
you're like, oh, thank you for that, right? But
yeah.
what's stay with that, like the feeling in the chest, like the disappointment. Just see if you could just, without analyzing it,
hmm
is it like just to notice the energy there and hold it for a moment?
I definitely want to cry. And I don't know from where that sensation is. Um,
Sure.
but it feels like if somebody were to tell me I was being an asshole, I have this facade that I keep up.
Yeah.
Um, and part of that's just like I've learned to mask certain parts of myself
Yeah.
in order to appear more social, more charismatic, more on top of things.
What's the
Um,
part that wants to hide, or what's the part that you're wanting to hide right now?
um, so in that case, I sort of the child in me.
Okay.
Like I said, I called back to disappointing parents, and I don't think it's like specifically my parents, but that idea of being a child
Sure.
and realizing, oh no, I did bad, and
Okay.
just like crumbling into like this tiny fetal position. Um,
Okay. So
that
let's try
that is the
something here, Eric.
emotion. Yeah.
Yeah. So see if you can just contact that child,
hmm
the one that's present here, right? See if you can maybe create a little bit of space psychologically between you, your awareness, and the child,
hmm
and just really tune in to be present to that. And whatever feeling of hurt or upset or fear might be present, just allow that too. Right? They may just show up as sensations in the body.
hmm I'm not breathing. That's one
Okay.
sensation that's coming up.
All right. So
Forgot to breathe.
great noticing. Breathe into that. So allow yourself to breathe into those sensations through the belly if you can.
I've had this come up in other parts of my life. This same exact feeling of like the facade coming down, everything crumbling, and just being a child behind it.
Yeah. So let's just assume the child needs something from you right now.
hmm
You might even just ask it wordlessly if you like. It's like, what does it need from you? What might you be hearing?
The child definitely needs to know that I know that it's doing its best. That even if it's screwed up in that moment, it is still good. It is still trying hard, and I'm still proud of it.
Yeah. Great. So even when it screws up, even when you screw up, you can see it's trying hard, it's trying its best. It's still good.
Mhm.
What happens if you just send yourself that recognition or send that child part of you that recognition right now?
My naturally, I have the question of what does this fix? Um, like I send the recognition, and then there's like a cool. I validate child, um, but I still need to put that facade back up.
Why?
I don't know. I'm a CEO of a funded company. Feels like I can't be a child, and like that childish version of me. Um,
Well, I want to make a distinction. I'm not suggesting that you show up to your meetings like a child who's easily wounded.
mhm. Yes. So then,
What happens if you're able to show up to your team where you're able to be present with the child that might feel hurt, but having no need to shield, to facade, between yourself and the team? So you show up like an asshole sometimes. People give you feedback.
I don't know if he's cool me talking about him. I think my co-founder is exceptionally good at this. Just bringing his curious, childlike self to everything, and then accepting feedback as it comes and iterating. There's much less of a facade. So, I mean, it's not the solution, but I at least have someone to look to for a positive example there.
So you have evidence that it can be done, where
Yeah.
someone can behave in a certain way in a certain ecosystem. They get feedback from the ecosystem. They adjust.
Yeah.
And they're able to keep iterating.
Yeah.
All while maintaining their childlike wonder. Sounds like.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I don't know. There is a line to be drawn though of like, ultimately a lot of the reason for a facade is you want to be able to achieve something, and I don't want my, the version of me that I bring to become a burden. I don't want it to be like a daycare of Erik.
I don't think your team wants that. I don't think anyone wants that.
So how do I simultaneously do both? Like, bring the more childlike version of myself, more vulnerable version of myself, which opens me up to trying things and iterating things, which is an amazing things that like kids do.
Yeah.
Is they're vulnerable, they're soft, but they haven't built up that armor, so they're willing to try things.
Right.
I just don't want to I don't want to be uninspiring, and I don't want to use people's time because I think I'm already asking so much of them.
So what does it look like to do everything you just said? Iterate, be willing to get it wrong, right? Try a bunch of things, and not needing anyone else around you to take care of you, but rather to show up with knowing that, yeah, you're going to get wounded, you're going to get hurt, you're going to get your feelings hurt, and then you can take care of yourself in that scenario so that you're not a burden for others.
Mm-hmm.
Just imagine that's possible for a moment.
Yeah. So I was immediately imagining it not being possible. That's a view into how I'm receiving it. Could I ask like contrary questions to like help navigate this?
This is your time. You can ask any question you want.
When does the work get done? Like this is ultimately, and this is why I'm starting this conversation, is more work needs to get done. And it feels counterintuitive to add this to the quantity of things I have to think about and spend time on. And, you can do it to an extreme, but in the end, like, it's hard to be simultaneously a founder and a monk who lives in the mountains and says nothing. So, like, what's the extent of this self-work? Or not as what is the extent,
Yeah. So I want
How do you
to,
do it without sacrificing
yeah,
the fact that things happen? Like food has to be consumed. Bills need to be paid. Salaries need to be paid. Um, like sales calls need to be taken.
I, yeah, let me reflect on that for a moment, Eric. I don't think we're talking about you going to be a monk in the mountain and, you know, rejecting the rest of the world. You do have a lot going on that you obviously, things that you care about and you want to advance forward, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think what we're talking about is, let me hide away in a cave now for 6 months and sort my shit out, and now I can be a good leader. I think what we're talking about is seeing more clearly the way you've been going about things and getting honest about what results am I creating through the way I've been approaching things in the status quo. So you sort of framed it as, hey, this seems like extra work. I need to add extra work now to get better results. But I think it's actually more, how do I change the way I'm doing this in the first place so that I'm getting different results?
I had a breakthrough or like a reframing just now. Visualization that helped. Of rather treating it. So previously it was the visualization was a child with like a rigid shell around it, and if that shell crumbles, then the child crumbles, and you realize, oh, the human is much smaller, much more childish than you previously thought. Whereas a different visualization that really helped me here just now was the idea of being in a meeting with my team. But the real me is standing off to the side, and there's a projection of myself in the meeting participating. And that projection is, previously that was the shell, the facade. The projection is whatever is like some transformation on myself that I feel is more presentable to the team. But because I'm operating through that projection and not through myself, I'm almost not even participating in the conversation. The real me is off to the side. So, like, I think maybe the word childish, I know a lot of the emotions come from the childish feeling of, failing or disappointing people.
Yeah.
But I think it's helped to reframe this as a sort of like I'm operating through a proxy. I'm operating through something that's not me. Okay. Therefore, of course, like, I'm not going to be as effective. Whereas, like, putting myself into that meeting, the meeting's still getting done, but it's a more true version of myself.
So let me just make sure I'm following. Yeah. So which one is the one that you've been using kind of more generally?
Previously, we'd been using the idea of I'm operating myself. Like, it is myself operating, but I have a facade. And if that facade crumbles, there's really a child behind it. And while you were talking, 1 minute ago, I had a different visualization of basically, rather than a child being like nested within me, I'm more like me. I'm across the room, and there's like some projection of myself.
Yeah,
that's actually doing the engagement, the interaction.
Okay.
That's the thing that just came up for me now. So previously we had been talking more about the child analogy.
Right. And this feels more empowering. Like, I'm curious, how does it feel for you? Like this visualization of kind of this way of being or this way of operating?
It makes it not feel like a regression, to drop the facade and go back to something that's more genuinely me. Because previously the genuine version of myself was very more childlike, which I didn't see as having a place at the meeting, if that makes sense.
I think there's a distinction here between showing up like a child and showing up authentically.
Yes. And maybe that's why my new analogy makes a bit more sense, or at least it helps distinguish those two. Of the goal is not to show up like a child. Um, the goal is to show up as in call it an unfiltered version of myself, and not filtered from like a sense of, well, I guess maybe I am filtering myself, but
I mean, just to be clear, like on some level, we're always filtering ourselves, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think it's very rare for us to enter a space, especially a professional one, where we're 100% authentic. And I think even authentic, where authenticity can be a loaded word, but
Yeah.
I think it's important for us to make a distinction that, like, like a child, they act out their emotions in a completely unregulated way, oftentimes, especially when they're younger, right? Or they might be really sensitive, and then when they feel hurt, they're going to really express that, right? Tears, rage, etc., right? And so I think that sort of behavior, at least from where I'm sitting, is kind of what we're saying we don't want. Are we on the same page on that?
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
I don't want that.
Yeah.
I want more
So,
authenticity, but I don't want to have that.
Yeah. Great. So, yeah, we're starting to get to the close here. I want to maybe, that's a great question here. What if you were to define the way you do want to show up in these spaces? Maybe it's that analogy that you were using earlier, that visualization you were using just earlier. But I'm wondering if you can just describe it more.
I want to show up as if I have helium in my body, like I'm floating, I'm bouncing. I think the word fun is ultimately the most childlike thing that I do want to bring into it. Because fun for me is the fuel for so many other positive things that I could bring in.
Great.
Certainly less stress. I think not naivete. I don't want to be bringing that in. But I do want, rather than just being locked up and tense, again on the helium thing, just feeling like I'm just floating around, having fun. Ultimately doing the same things and probably doing them better. Being able to fail and get up easily, something that children are especially good at, just falling.
Right.
And like viewing it as part of the process. I think the more we agonize on each individual fall, the bigger they seem. And I think the goal is to make falls feel small. So you just get over them, and a few minutes later, you've forgotten.
Right.
That'd be a goal. I just want to smile and laugh more, and do so with the team. Maybe also just like faster learning, right? Of discover something cool and notice, oh, this actually breaks the frame versus stressfully hanging on to my previous definition of how things worked.
Right. Yeah. Awesome. So you just, I don't know why you use the word helium. I always imagine just like a balloon floating around, and it's like it can get knocked around, but it's still floating, right? So it's still ascending. I just, as we're coming to a close here, I love the visuals that you just provided there, Erik. In the spirit of just starting small, like, what's a small way you can start to really embody what you just described as you kind of move forward into showing up to the team?
I have something that came to mind. I don't know if it's the correct answer, but asking the word why a lot. And not in a condescending like why, but more like, hey, why? Like, let's explore this. This sounds fun. More out
Right.
of the, hey, there's something about you that I don't know, and I'm just curious. Like, why? I feel like that's something I could bring into my interactions with the team. That, I'd learn something. It'd feel more human, and being more human ultimately leads to having more fun, in my opinion.
Yeah.
It's very important not to do it confrontationally, but I think it could be done in a way that sparks conversation that otherwise wouldn't happen.
Right. Yeah.
So that's one thing. I don't want to like fake happy. I don't want to fake smile. So I wouldn't know what to do on that front, but I think bring in more of my childlike wonder. Also, just like releasing my expectation that I should know everything, because that opens you up to being more wondrous.
Right.
I think those two things would probably, or it's better than not doing those, and they're worth trying, and they're the things that currently have come to my head.
Great. Yeah. So like when I hear you describe the showing with why, and there's like a non-confrontational sort of way of doing it, there's just like open curiosity. It's like, I actually really want to find out more. I want to know more. I'm like, ooh, like that doesn't, I'm missing something there. Cool. Like there's something for me to learn there. Right.
Yeah.
There's a lightness to it.
Yeah. Yeah. Lightness is a good word. Like the helium.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, oh, why? Like, oh, cool. Like, let's float over there and like try that out or learn something. How exciting.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Well, I'm excited to hear how the lightness and the curiosity and the wonder kind of make its way in for you as you're kind of moving forward on this.
Yeah. Looking forward.
Yeah. Any final reflections or thoughts before we close out here?
I'm very impressed and surprised by the amount of thematic leaps we went through here. Because originally I was talking about Caesar being in front of an army in battle. And then later it's like, oh, I am a child. And like, that wasn't something I expected to come up. So I'm feeling really grateful for that. This felt like a good session. So
great.
That's my main observation here. So
Awesome.
I appreciate it. Thanks, Brian.
I appreciate you. Thanks, Erik.
Appreciate you.
We all have a desire to be liked and approved, but when taken too far, we can enter people-pleasing territory. For Erik, he knew that the team needed bolder leadership. In fact, they had asked him directly to hold them accountable to the results. But Erik struggled to find the intensity the team was asking for because he worried about taking advantage of his team, and that would mean he's an asshole. As a coach, this was a huge clue for me. That's why I experimented with calling Erik an asshole right there and observing his reaction. His body told us more than his words were ever going to. Tightness in the chest, tears behind the eyes. That allowed us to move past the intellectual and touch the emotional experience of it all. This is where Erik's younger self came up, the inner child that worries it's done something wrong. The breakthrough came when Erik realized he didn't need to show up as a vulnerable child, but rather he could be his adult self that led with intensity while maintaining a sense of internal safety. From there, he could tap into a sense of fun, lightness, and wonder. This was a great example of how we get blocked, not by our intellectual knowing, but our emotional knowing. Erik might know he's not actually an asshole, but in the moment, it feels true. By connecting directly with this part and showing it a different way, he was able to find a new path forward. So here are some actionable nuggets for you. 1. Have clear discussions with your team on how you want to collectively handle feedback and accountability. 2. If you find yourself getting stuck, even though you quote-unquote know what you should be doing, then you're probably resisting an emotional experience. Getting unstuck means moving toward that experience. Finally, whatever vulnerabilities you find in yourself, treat them with compassion. It is the best way to find calm. and allow your more mature self to take the wheel. Thank you for listening to Slow Down to Speed Up. If you enjoyed this podcast, please rate it in your favorite podcasting app. If you are a founder who would like help in reaching the next level through coaching, or if you'd like to come on the show, please contact me at dashingleadership.com.